Three sources tell CNN that according to an early U.S. intelligence assessment, the U.S. military strikes on three of Iran's nuclear facilities last weekend did not destroy the core components of the country's nuclear program and likely only set it back a few months.
That's right. So this is an assessment that actually is out from the Defense Intelligence Agency. That is the Pentagon's intelligence arm. And it was based on a battle damage assessment conducted by U.S. CENTCOM after the strikes, according to one of the sources. Let's go to CNN national security correspondent Natasha Bertrand, who has this exclusive new reporting. This is to that question that has been asked about how much damage has been done. This is a real question. It's also a political question that has been to something that Donald Trump has been sort of dealing with here recently. What are you learning, Natasha?
Yeah, look, Brianna, this is the first assessment that we are getting that the U.S. intelligence community has found about the battle damage that resulted from those U.S. military strikes on these three Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend. And as you said, it was produced by the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the Pentagon's intelligence arm. And it is worth noting that it is a very early assessment. The strikes were only a matter of days ago, and the intelligence community is still gathering intelligence. They are still working to come up with a full, comprehensive picture of what exactly happened here. But based on a battle damage assessment that was carried out by U.S. Central Command, essentially looking at the images and looking at what was actually damaged, the Defense Intelligence Agency has assessed that the core components of Iran's nuclear program are largely intact, and that Iran's nuclear program has essentially only been set back by months. Now, we presented this information to the White House for comment, and White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, she did acknowledge the existence of this assessment, but she said in a statement that the administration disagrees with it. She said, quote, "This alleged assessment is flat out wrong and was classified as top secret, but was still leaked to CNN by an anonymous low-level loser in the intelligence community. The leaking of this alleged assessment is a clear attempt to demean President Trump and discredit the brave fighter pilots who conducted a perfectly executed mission to obliterate Iran's nuclear program. Everyone knows what happens when you drop 14 30,000-pound bombs perfectly on their targets, total obliteration." Now, it is worth noting here that there has been dissent, I should say, within the intelligence community, within the defense community about just how much of an impact these massive bunker buster bombs would actually have on Iran's nuclear facilities. It was far from certain, given that these bombs had never been tested in an actual combat scenario, whether they would actually penetrate those very, very deep underground tunnels that lie underneath these nuclear facilities. And what we are told is that as of now, this Defense Intelligence Agency assessment, it does conclude at this point, again, it is still very early, that those underground facilities, including the centrifuges, including the highly enriched uranium that everyone has been talking so much about, those are largely intact. Now, of course, this does stand at odds with what President Donald Trump and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth have been saying in recent days about the impact of these U.S. military strikes. Of course, President Trump said it was totally obliterated, and Secretary Hegseth did as well. And he actually also provided CNN with a statement. And he said that, quote, "Based on everything we have seen, and I've seen it all, our bombing campaign obliterated Iran's ability to create nuclear weapons. Our massive bombs hit exactly the right spot at each target and worked perfectly. The impact of those bombs is buried under a mountain of rubble in Iran. So anyone who says the bombs were not devastating is just trying to undermine the president and the successful mission." Now, our sources did emphasize here that there was severe damage that was done largely to the above-ground structures at these nuclear sites. And so there was damage done, of course, by these massive bombs. But the core components of the nuclear program, we are told, they are largely intact, and it only set the program back by a matter of months. Boris, Brianna.
Natasha Bertrand, please stand by. Let's go now live to CNN anchor and chief White House correspondent Caitlin Collins, who's traveling with President Trump as he attends a NATO summit from the Netherlands. Caitlin, you heard the statement there from the White House. They acknowledged the existence of this assessment, but said that they disagreed with it and then attacked the sourcing behind it. What are you hearing?
Yeah, and I think it's notable that when we reached out to the White House for comment on what Natasha and Katie Bowe had been hearing here from these sources about this initial assessment, that they provided statements not only from Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, obviously, who is designed to respond to media reports, but also from the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth himself, given he is on the record talking about what he believes the results of these strikes were here. Now, the issue here at hand is obviously this is an initial assessment. We're still waiting for a comprehensive assessment to be done. And as Natasha mentioned there, certainly more information could come to light. And that is how this works as they are in the early days of assessing this. But if this is the assessment that stands as it is right now and what the DIA found, according to this report, that undermines what President Trump has been saying publicly about the result and the impact of these strikes and what they had on Iran's nuclear program. Just this morning, he has been quite defensive about this, saying it's not enough in his view to just say that they were sufficiently damaged. He is saying they were completely destroyed and obliterated, and he's been defending the B-2 bombers and the pilots flying those B-2s that took these bombs over to Iran on Saturday night and dropped them on top of these nuclear sites at great lengths, as he did as he was leaving the White House today. So certainly it would undermine and undercut what the president himself has been saying. But I do think, as Natasha mentioned there, this is an early and preliminary assessment, as they're still waiting to see what the other findings show. But this was the big question going into this. And I had actually asked President Trump this when we were on Air Force One last week, coming back from Canada, because the bombs that were used here, Boris and Brianna, had never been used in combat before. Yes, they'd been heavily tested, but they'd never actually been dropped on any site before. And the question I had for the president was, did he have assurances or any guarantees that conducting these U.S. strikes would actually take out Iran's nuclear program? He told me there were no guarantees in life, but obviously that's a key question that we were told he was also asking his officials behind the scenes, is how would this play out? What would this look like? Because as we know, the president, even with military action in his first term, does go through these assessments in a pretty thorough manner to want to know what the other end of this is going to look like.
Yeah, and certainly this is something, Caitlin, just put into context, because President Trump is there in the Netherlands, as you are there following this very important NATO summit. And he has been, projecting this great success. He's also there at this summit that is so much tailored to him. He's riding a little bit of a high as he's there. So any sort of perceived slight to what he considers a great success, and so far the holding of this at least brief ceasefire so far, how is he going to perceive that?
Yeah, and the president has been at NATO summits before where things did not go well. I mean, everyone remembers the Brussels summit of his first term, where he walked out of the room at one point. So often when he comes to these, and there is a new NATO Secretary General this time, who was sending the president messages earlier today that Trump was then posting screenshots of on Truth Social, saying that they were essentially waiting for his arrival here, as he just arrived a few hours ago. A lot of this is going to focus on defense spending. A lot of it's going to focus on Russia as well. The Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is going to be here for his meeting with the president. It is only their second meeting since that fiery Oval Office meeting that happened a few months ago. And so that is something everyone's going to be watching closely. But the fact that the key takeaway here is, going into these summits, they largely decide what they're going to talk about beforehand. Though obviously when President Trump is in the room, as his own aides will very, very well and readily concede, things can change, and you'll always know what the outcome is going to be. But the fact that it is tailored to be on defense spending, which is his chief complaint with NATO countries, that they do not spend enough on defense, does show the impact that he has on the conversations that are held at summits like this one. But he was wanting to come into this with this ceasefire brokered between Israel and Iran. That was in part due to his anger that we saw this morning coming out of the White House. And so that is something we'll see how he talks about when he's here meeting with these other world leaders, as he's doing right now.